All right, so some of the content that you had discussed, when we're looking at how the central and peripheral nervous system work together, where, what would be a definition of your peripheral nervous system? Where do you think that would be located? Right, because when we talk about vision, okay, so in other words, as I keep walking this way, I can kind of visualize what Jordan's doing not very well. I can see yourself quite a bit more than what I could Jordan, but then as I move forward and then she comes out of view, now you would be in the same spot. It's just what branches off, kind of like your peripheral vision then, okay? So how would that be linked into what it is that you're feeling? We would say, gosh, we're feeling awful. Is that the type of feeling that we're talking about in the functions of these? Probably not. Feelings in that sense are probably more so of what your emotions are, not what your actual nervous system is feeling. They're related, but they're certainly not the same. They can have an effect on one another. Okay, so some of the best ways to think about that. I always try to think of something more than just if something is hot, you're typically going to let something like that go, or if it maybe feels like it could be sharp, that would be another aspect of letting something go, or especially um, if you ever work with your hands, are you maybe not good at using gloves? I'm not. Sometimes I think it just hampers and slows down the job we're trying to do. So especially with some of this concrete work, um, some of the little nicks, cuts, and scrapes on the tip of the fingers are starting to go away. That's what I mean by something sharp. You might be running your hand along something, you go, oh God, that hurt, and you know right away, you know that, oh my gosh, I could have done some potential major damage to that, because that's what we mean by the part of feeling. It's traveling through your peripheral nervous system and making its way up through. You're going to find out that a lot of the nerve tracts in our body and a lot of the blood vessel tracts are named after the essentially the bones of the skeletal system. So it could be such a thing that your third and fourth appendages here may travel up what we would call your ulnar nerve, okay? Because your radius is on the other side. Then maybe your first and second and thumb appendages will go up your radial nerve. Then they eventually come together to your humeral nerve, then through what we call plexus, okay? So what we call brachial plexus, that's where a whole bunch of nerve tracts come together, and then eventually attaches to the spinal cord in your, what would be your neck region, which is your cervical portion of your spinal cord, which would be part of your central nervous system. Okay, so some of the higher order thoughts. Now, thinking can be abstract thought, or it could be something that we possibly remember. In other words, some of this abstract thought could be something like, I need to recognize, I remember what the asymmetrical reagent is, but I need to look and analyze which one it is as I'm looking at it. That's abstract thought, in my opinion. You're remembering what the asymmetrical reagent is, but it's still abstract thought. That's what we consider problem solving. So, of course, that's thinking. And, of course, memory would be today how your 5 kilometer race ends in Del Rapids. What's your memory upon that? Yeah, you're pointing upwards because it finishes on a gradual uphill slope. And then finally, your sense of awareness is just your conscious thoughts. You know where you're at, you know what day it is, you know what hour it is, you know, again, what you're thinking at that time. Okay? So that's what we mean by consciousness, because if there is any type of damage, potential damage to the brain, some of the first things that might be asked by medical personnel. Do you know your name? Do you know where you are? Do you know what happened? Okay. Now, some of that is memory, but not in that sense. It's just, do you know what possibly happened to you? That's be a sense of awareness then. Okay. So all of these are neurons, whether it's in the central nervous system or the peripheral nervous system. Okay? Those are all, the basic unit of that is the neuron. Now, some of the, for instance, some of the chemical changes to your surroundings. For instance, um, it would make sense to me that if you had birthday cake yesterday, your body's going to sense that and make a chemical change, because as you're taking in those carbohydrates or those sugars, your body's going to undergo a chemical change. Okay? In other words, to do what with those carbohydrates or sugars? To either break them down or store them. Okay? That'd be an example of a chemical change. Some of the physical changes to our surroundings is, oh my gosh, it feels kind of cold in here. So walk over to the hall tree or the coat rack and put on the sweatshirt. That's a physical change. Just something like temperature could be just something physical. And your body's telling you that because you may start to shiver or something like that and then think, gosh, it's kind of cold. Or during your practices, we see this a lot, whether it's on the golf course or even over here. If you're running 2 loops around something, oh gosh, it's kind of hot, and everyone that has extra clothing on usually throws their sweatshirts off in a pile. So again, that would be a physical change to your surroundings. And this is something that Mr. Holt was going over. These transmissions are called a synapse, that information that goes from one cell to another. That's what it is, but it doesn't describe the process. The process is the synapse. Shoot, I didn't take roll. That will not take very long. I like to get that done before I forget. I know, we're all here. Looking for something. It's entitled The Primitive Brain. I'm having difficulty locating that. it's just a short video, but you may have to save that for another time. Oh, no, here we go. So the last thing that we want to go over, and we'll put a brief drawing up on the board. So we know that, as you can see, receiving is your dendrites. So if you have structures that receive impulses, well, then there must also be what? Structures that send them away. There's your axons. Yep. And even though this talks about the brain as it develops, it still has the functional unit or the neuron in illustrating how these axons become more efficient. Okay? Because it was something that Mr. Hoth was discussing correctly yesterday, and that is the idea that the the structures that conduct the most efficient impulses will have the largest myelin sheaths on there. Now, when we talk about that, there's a chemical difference between the cells that are located and produce that myelin in the, think about this, I think it's in the central nervous system and in the peripheral nervous system is called Schwann cells. It's with those two that produce that myelin. Okay, so and the last thing we want to look at here, okay, and it's something that you had seen before, and that was and this is that abstract thought. Noticing the difference again between the symmetrical hydrocarbon and asymmetrical hydrocarbon. Okay. So with that then, this is something that you have seen before, and that is the idea of what this nerve cell would look like, and you would have perhaps tiny structures located like this all around. And then finally this guy, which then would be another one of them little terminals coming together here. Okay? So in other words, this must be a what? Because it's going that direction. It's an axon. But once it reaches its terminal end, even though it's still moving this way, now it's receiving information. There's your dendrite. There's your axon. Okay? And what happens is, yes, the thing we're leaving out is all these little bumps known as myelin. Okay, that helps produce the nerve impulses, but we will see that in this short video. Okay, we will catch up to you next time.